Bon was what they needed because he was a front man, and he became, when he left us, he became a showman. He learnt from us, from the Valentines, and no question about that. He'd had, virtually, 10 years being a showman up front, and he was what they needed as well. He was a front man with a good voice.
This is the only surviving footage of a documentary Lovegrove produced on fraternity in 1972.
They believed that they were the best band in the world. They were, again, going to conquer the world. And it was also a time of many magic mushrooms being dropped and lots of alcohol being drunk. And that became part of fraternity as well, without a doubt. And they were pretty heady times.
Fraternity aspired to that thing that the band had, the band that backed Bob Dylan. They had the big pink up at Woodstock. Well, fraternity got their own little house in the hills, and they, as far as I can tell, sat around, got stoned and jammed, and that's like about it. They made a few sort of half-assed records in terms of, they cobbled them together and sort of got them out, and they had this kind of cult reputation, but really they had some potential which was kind of squandered by being in Adelaide and whatever, and then they went to the UK, and that's where, they were lost, and they completely lost it, and it just fizzled out.
Bon's first trip to England in 1972 was a disaster. Fraternity failed to grab the attention of the British public, and it would prove fatal to the band.
It was a pretty hard experience, I think, for every member of that band. Bon had just got married to Irene, so the whole band, including the dog, and all the wives, it's just this wastrel hippie tribe, and that was just infighting in a small house and going, and just seeing that it's not going to land in your lap. You can land in the UK, and you're not going to be Jethro Tull overnight.
Bon returned to Australia broke. A second band had fallen apart, and he began drinking heavily. He became a makeshift member of the Mount Lofty Rangers, if only to pass the time until a more appropriate band appeared. Yet danger loomed on the horizon.
It was during a rehearsal one night that Bon got really drunk after having an argument with a member of the band. I think it was actually the old bass player of fraternity. I could be wrong on that one. Got very drunk and used to drink a lot of brandy straight from the bottle, and decided to get on his Harley motorbike and scream off to see someone. He was in a really foul mood. The thing about Bon was, as anybody who knows him well, is he could turn very quickly. He could turn into a really bad mood, an aggressive mood. Anyway, he ripped off on his Harley-Davidson bike into the darkness of the night. And later on that night, and the night went on, later on that night, around about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from Irene, his wife, saying, "Vince, can you come and pick me up? Bon's been in an accident, he's nearly dead."
Despite several injuries, Bon Scott survived. During his long recovery, he stayed with Vincent Lovegrove, who is now working as a booker for clubs in Adelaide.
Bon was recovering from this motorcycle accident he'd had early in 1974, almost killed, a terrible accident. And it was through the recovery period, because he was in hospital for a long time. I used to like to compare this to Bob Dylan's motorcycle accidents, a bit like that. Bon was reflecting on what's he going to do with his life. Fraternity had broken up, his marriage had broken up. He was leaning on Irene, his wife, a bit, and there was a bit of feeling there. But he just knew that he had to do something.
At that stage, I was booking a very young band from Sydney called ACDC. I used to book ACDC a lot, mainly because their mentor and big brother, George, who Bon and I had befriended during our Valentine's days when they were in the Easy Beats. And George and I remained, I wouldn't say friends, but certainly acquaintances. One time, after they'd been down 4 or 5 times, George gave me a call and said, you know, what happened to the money that the boys got last time? They didn't get any. And I said, well, I gave it to their manager. And he said, well, listen, do me a favour, he's going to get the sack. Next time they're over, give it to Malcolm. He's the man you give the cash to now. And he said, by the way, do you know any singers around? Because we're going to sack the singer as well.
Vince could think of only one suitable replacement, and Bon Scott's years in the wilderness would soon be at an end. Vince took Bon to see the young band at a gig in Adelaide.
I was enthusiastic. I really wanted him to get in the band. I was really enthusiastic. We were out the front looking at the band, and I said, what do you think? They're great, aren't they? And he said, well, they're all right, but, you know, they're only kids. They're a bit young, aren't they? And I said, yeah, but, you know, just listen, they really rock. They've got that Chuck Berry thing, they've got that Stones thing, you know, they're going to do it. He said, oh, yeah, I think they'll do it. But he said, I'm just not sure, you know, would they have anything to you know, have any common ground? He said, you know, I've got a bit more experience than they have. I said, okay, well, you know, let's go back and meet them. And I went back and we met them. And prior to that, I'd mentioned to them, I was backstage and mentioned to them and said, you know, they said, well, come on, Vince, have you got a singer? And I said, yeah, you know, what about Bon? And they said, oh, he's a bit old, isn't he? And I said, mate, he'll rock the arse off you guys. Make no mistake about that. And they said, oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, Malcolm and Angus were kids then, as, you know, I wasn't much older, but the reality is that I knew it'd fit. I knew it'd fit. And so they went back that night to the house of the bass player fraternity in his basement, and they jammed, and they did, you know, Chuck Berry songs, and they did just 12-bar rock and roll songs. And they gelled, and they were up all night. The next day, Bon came home, came in, packed his bag, and I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to Sydney. And I said, what are you going up there to live? And he said, no, I'm joining the band.
Bon returned to Sydney with the band, and while they waited for an appropriate time to sack Dave Evans, he got to know the various members well.
Bon was a funny guy. He's very cheeky, always laughing, always joking, live wire, nice bloke. Yeah, he was fun to have around, Bon.
Evans's days were numbered, and it was at the Hotel Esplanade in Melbourne that the final confrontation occurred.
Yeah, the last gig at the Esplanade Hotel in St Kilda was difficult. I knew we were having the meeting that night. I'd almost decided that I was going to split with the band anyway. I'd had enough at that stage. And I spent that afternoon with 2 friends of mine who were trying to talk me out of leaving the band. We did the gig. No one really spoke to each other. I wasn't speaking to the roadies. It was pretty solemn, to tell you the truth, except when we were on stage, of course. We did our act as we always do. That's being professional. But yeah, the air was thick and heavy, I can tell you. And then after the gig, we just went back to the hotel, and it was all over, for me.
My feeling with ACDC and the whole frontman scenario at the time was they knew Dave Evans wasn't quite right. They knew they had to make a change. Their big fear was throwing him out and not being able to find anybody else. So I think they bumbled along with him, hoping either he would suddenly improve, which was unlikely, or that they'd meet the right guy. And Bon Scott appeared. They knew he was the right guy.
Bon took over and brought vitality and vigour to a band that had yet to find its feet. It was soon apparent to all that the decision to recruit the more mature frontman was crucial.
Bon Scott became the heart and soul of ACDC. He once said, and I think he was probably right, somebody asked him, are you AC or DC? Trying to joke, said, no, I'm the lightning flash in the middle. And that's exactly what he was. He was the fulcrum. He was the focus. He brought the whole thing together. When he arrived, suddenly, flash, everything fitted in.
It had to happen. It couldn't not happen, you know, because it was too perfect. The dovetail was too perfect. I mean, ACDC were not necessarily the most open-minded group of people, but when Bon stepped into that breach, it was clear. You know, they couldn't fight it even if they wanted to, because he was the perfect guy that was going to do it. And same for Bon. Had Bond not encountered ACDC, God knows, I mean, I hate to think that he would have been, you know, wallowing in the traps in the early 80s, flogging some blues rock band. That's a terrible thought too. He was too good for that.
The band decided to relocate to Melbourne and in their house in St Kilda began to work on fresh material that would utilise their new singer.
ACDC upping sticks and moving from Sydney to Melbourne was crucial. Now, the feeling was that they weren't getting far enough, quickly enough in Sydney. They'd probably reached the stage where they'd hit a ceiling, playing the same clubs to the same old people and blah-de-da-de-da. It no longer had an impact for them. They weren't moving forward. Moving to Melbourne opened things up. It seemed to be much more of a cosmopolitan city, more places to play, and they were playing to people who didn't know who they were, and they were better at it. They'd learnt their chops in Sydney, so they went to Melbourne as a decent band, not as a new bunch on the block trying to sort of make a first impact. They had made that first impact. They had confidence. It showed on stage, and suddenly people were saying, you know, that lot, they're rather good.
After further intensive touring, in February 1975, ACDC released their debut album. Cut in 10 days, High Voltage killed off memories of their previous glam incarnation. It was all-out rock and roll.
Well, the Australian High Voltage is a bit of a patchwork. It was done very fast because budgets were like that. They didn't have a huge budget. They didn't have 10, 12 months to play with. They had to go in, get it done, and get out. And I think it sounds on occasion like it's a rushed record. It's almost like a demo. We now have an album of our songs. Let's see and assess strengths and the weaknesses. So while it was commercially released, I think they treated it very much as an assessment of where they are and how they were going to get further.
I think High Voltage kind of gave them the taste of things to come, you know, and I think that they were hungry for it. And Australia at the time was very hungry for a band like them, because you've got to remember at the time there was, you know, if you go back to kind of late 60s, there was, you know, artists around like Normie Rowe and Masters Apprentices, and I mean, you know, but we didn't get bands like Cream touring, or we didn't get Deep Purple touring. We were kind of barren in that sense as far as rock was concerned. And then you had bands on the flip side like Little River Band, for instance, that so weren't, you know, gonna quench the rock appetite that Beer Swilling Australia at the time definitely had. You know, Foster's cans in one hand, VB in the other, singlets, Marlboro Lights. I think